Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to be doing the presentation this morning. Unfortunately, Danielle's not too well this morning, so you get my voice instead, and we helped ably by their Skills Miner team as well, I'm sure. So, just as a quick agenda, we'll do a brief introduction to start with, um, and thank you for everybody who's just saying hello in the chat as well. If you do want to ask any questions, you can do that with the chat also. We'll talk about workforce foresighting and give a little bit of a background in terms of what workforce foresighting is and how that's led to the data and insights that we've developed through that. And we'll just briefly go through some of the topics that we've studied in terms of offshore wind and their implications as we see it for the skills picture. And then I'll hand over to the Skills Miner team, Kirsty, Daniel, and Donna, who will take us through the use cases of the platform and what that looks like and how this tool is going to help people in industry, how it's going to help employers, employees, and educators. And we'll take a quick break, I think, around about probably 11 o'clock, and then we'll bring you back in and Dan can show you the tool itself.
Thanks, Paul. That's great.
So our aims by the end of this session really is to help you understand what workforce foresighting is, why we think it's relevant to the skills picture in offshore renewables and more widely. We'll take you through the kind of data the process has generated so far, and we'll show you how to access and use that data. And then the idea really is to get an understanding of how the education and the training sector can work with industry and with organisations like ORE Catapult to help the offshore renewables industry drive productivity. So we'd really like your feedback as well, both at the end of this talk and anything that you think of during as well. Very much welcome. Thanks, Dina. So brief introductions. My name is Paul Hatchett. I'm a consultant who's been helping Offshore Catapult with this interesting process of workforce foresighting off and on for the past couple of years. My background is through aerospace and onshore renewables and some subsea robotics into the offshore renewables sector. And I'll let the Skills Minds team introduce themselves as well. Firstly, I'll just say as well on Danielle's behalf, thank you very much for joining Offshore Catapult on this. Danielle is the future skills manager and sponsor for this work and is very disappointed that she can't join us here today, but she's very much with us in spirit. So I'll let Kirsty, Dina and Dan introduce themselves.
Morning, everybody, and thank you, Paul. I'm Kirsty Mitchell. I'm CEO and founder of Skills Miner. Our background is in everything skills related, education, looking at employment, recruitment, workforce planning. We do a bit like what it says on the tin. We mine and map skills, and so this project has been incredible, and we've very much enjoyed working with the team. And I will pass you over to Dinah and Dan. And I look forward to your questions and showing you what we've been busy doing over the last couple of months.
Thank you, Kirsty. I'm Dinah Turner. I'm the Customer Director here at Skills Miner, here to help people understand how we can make the data that we gather the most useful and most helpful for customers.
Thanks, Dinah. Dan Bartley, Product Manager at Skills Miner, so responsible for the development of the prototype that you'll see towards later on in this webinar. So look forward to showing you that. Thank you.
I think we're back over to learning a bit more about foresight to skills insight now with Paul.
All right, thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, we can move along. So just a brief introduction to workforce foresighting. I think I can see a few people who've joined us who've been through the process before and some who haven't as well. Workforce foresighting is an initiative that was spun out of the high value manufacturing catapult based on a report called Manufacturing the Future Workforce. And it's really quite a detailed process. It's very bottom up. It gathers a lot of input from industry, from employers, technologists. Fundamentally, we're trying to ask the question, what are the skills that are going to be needed in the sort of 5 to 10 year time frame to bring new technologies online in offshore renewables. And the idea of doing that bit of foresighting and thinking about the future is to really try and move the UK from a traditionally lagging perspective on skills to something that is much more leading, to try and give education time to develop curricula, to put that into place, and to get students and professionals through those training qualifications in time for the broad front deployment of new technology. It is quite detailed, it's quite a substantive process with a lot of workshops, and it's certainly not perfect. But as far as we're aware, foresighting is the only process really in the UK at the moment that is asking that critical question about what are the skills needs tomorrow, not just the gaps today, but what are we going to see tomorrow? And it is coordinated across and through the UK Catapult network and all the centres like offshore renewables. Thank you, Dina. So I mentioned the Manufacturing the Future Workforce report, you can see there. And a key part of that is the skills value chain. And the idea of the skills value chain is really to understand how to scale up industry and new technology through workforce development. And the very first stage of the skills value chain that you can see on the left there, that is the workforce foresighting part. And that's really the background to what we've done. And we'll bring you up to speed with what we've done so far, first of all today. But then really what we're looking at is starting to move it into the later stages of the value chain, how we curate that data, how we start to make all of that visible to people, and enable industry and educators to really make use of that and start to drive action and change. So the idea we're fundamentally trying to do is connect that innovation through to skills. So to say it's a very detailed and long process, but to give you the very brief sort of 3-step intro, we begin with taking input from technologists. We use a lot of Miro boards, generate a lot of post-it notes, and that's all about scoping out what these different technologies can be. We then take the organizational capabilities that come out of that first step, and we work with employers to try and refine that. And in particular, we start collecting all these different capability needs into what we call future occupational profiles. They're really just bundles of capabilities of things that we may need or we think employment and industry need in the future. And then finally, and the stage where we're really looking at the moment is causing action. And that's how we take the data, we start to interpret that data, put it into context, and help to translate from these ideas of future profiles and future needs and translate that into curricula for further education, higher education, and professional training. So the context to all of this, the strategic driver, what we call the national challenge, is really about this big growth in offshore wind. So we've got a current installed capacity of something around 15 gigawatts, and the Clean Power Plan 2030, which is a DESNZ, or Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. The target really is to get that up to 43 to 50 gigawatts by 2030. So it is a big jump. There's obviously a huge implication from that for the workforce in an industry that's currently employing something like 40,000 staff, and that's already up from 32,000 a couple of years ago. We think that's going to translate to 75,000 more workers by 2030. And if you're working at the upper end of that target, the 50 gigawatt range, it's probably getting on for nearly 100,000 more workers. And that's just in the industry directly. There's also all of the supply chain, which I think is probably underestimated there, but at least another 10,000. So taking all that together, we know there are future technologies coming. We know that there's a big growth in demand and in ambition in terms of offshore wind. So the industry is starting to look at how that's achieved, and a big part of the genesis of our work has been the Offshore Wind Industrial Growth Plan, and that's produced by Renewable UK in conjunction with OIC, the Crown Estate, and Crown Estate Scotland. And one of the things the Wind Growth Plan does is it starts to think about what are the core technologies needed, and whether they're about responding to the demand, whether it's about expanding new technologies or finding disruptive technologies. We've taken all of that and we've looked at it and we've said, right, where do we think that this foresighting process can help fill those future technology gaps. So I'll go through briefly now the topics we've looked at so far. I'm not going to dwell on these too long. It's really just a background to explain the data that we've gathered. So the first round of topics, we looked at dynamic cable systems for floating offshore wind, and we looked at robotic and autonomous systems used for operations and maintenance. The second group of topics looked at automated welding for offshore flotation structures. So this idea of moving from manual welding to using robots fundamentally. We looked in a similar way at advancing manufacturing of blades. So again, trying to transition in the future from very, very manual layup of composite and fibers into something that's more automated. And they then looked at high voltage direct current cable systems, really about the economic way of transporting electricity from far offshore wind farms back to shore. And then recently we've just concluded the data gathering part of two further topics, one on accelerating subsea survey using autonomy and AI, and another topic on how we can use things like battery storage, generation of hydrogen in order to smooth delivery of power from offshore wind to the grid. So through all of that work, we've 7 foresighting studies, over 50 workshops with industry participants and educated participants, and those participants have come from 46 organizations. And from all of that work, we generated 720 what we call these capability statements. They're a little bit like duty statements in apprenticeship standards, if anybody's familiar with those. And we've bundled those into about 77 different role profiles. So it's a lot of data fundamentally. And one of the big questions we've had, and Danielle's been hugely helpful in driving this question forward, is how do we make this actionable? What do we do? How can we categorize that data? How can we make it more digestible and usable for industry? Help people to identify new skills? And how do we communicate that out effectively to industry? How do we inform people about the expected changes in technology and help with ways to translate that into skills? And yeah, making that usable, I think, is the key point we're trying to drive. So we've had two thoughts really about ways to take the foresighting data and make it more actionable. We're taking a lot of data, which is collections of duty statements or capability statements, and we've analysed that data across all of the studies so far. Two things have come out of that. The first we call emerging themes. We also sometimes refer to them as traversal themes. And the second is about role archetypes. So I'll talk a little bit about those. So looking across all of the cycles we've done so far, 3 themes began to emerge. And I suppose what we mean by that is that when we look at the capabilities identified, you can see commonalities emerging. So the first group of themed capabilities are around digital, a lot to do with data analytics, simulation, digital twinning, really the introduction of industry 4.0 technologies, and of course now we're seeing a lot of AI coming into that topic as well. The second cluster we saw was around automation, in particular the idea of using robotics and automation to speed up work, to be able to increase capacity and reliability. And then the third group is around sustainability and circularity. So I think if Danny can advance that slide a step or two, we'll see some things dropping in. Collectively, we think a lot of those topics fall around the idea of Industry 5.0. And what, if I rewind slightly, the sort of industrial revolutions start with the steam revolution, which is often termed Industry 1. and really just the introduction of mechanized production. We then move through industry 2 and 3, where we get to sort of computerization. Industry 4 is typically where people describe us as being now, and that's the introduction of big data, cyber and physical systems, Internet of Things. And really, these concepts are starting to move us towards the idea of Industry 5, where we start to think about human centricity, sustainability, and resilience. So our idea behind the role archetypes part of this equation has been to try and develop a taxonomy and a foundation. When you think of the 77 different role profiles that we've identified with industry so far, quite often they'll have titles that are very domain specific. They may not be very transparent in terms of working out what the content is from the title. And we certainly don't expect education and training to go away and develop 77 new training courses. So we were really trying to think about how do we make that easier and more accessible. And the way we've done that is with the concept of role archetypes. So we've really just been trying to think about what is the absolute foundational role or the foundational qualification behind all of these different future job requirements. And we started off just with a very basic idea that pretty much a lot of the roles we could see were deriving from fundamentals like mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. We could also see that generally there was a sort of grouping of roles around the technician side of things, and there was a grouping of roles around engineering. So that was our 4 starting points. Things did get a little bit more complex from there, but not too much. Hopefully you'll see if Diana can just advance that a click or so. We've added in, I think, to a total there of 14 role archetypes. We've tried to keep that to the principle of as many as needed, but as few as possible. And you can see on the right hand side of this chart, that just shows us how the different profiles that we've developed through foresighting, how those align to the archetypes. So how do we think archetypes can be used in practice? One of the ideas here is that if you're trying to think about taking something like mechanical engineering, perhaps you're recruiting mechanical engineers, or perhaps you're delivering an engineering degree, and you want to future-proof that, one way you can do that is to pick up one of our emerging themes like digital and data, and we can expand that in terms of being able to say to training into industry, here are the additional capabilities we think, or through foresighting, we've identified that are needed. And the idea then, by layering those additional capabilities on top of the core archetype, is that gives us a future-proofed role. So I think if you can click on one step down, I think we get the list. So for example, there's probably something like 20, 24 different capabilities that sit within that bucket. So just a quick pause. If people can drop any answers in the chats, sorry, any questions that you have so far about what I've talked about, or role archetypes, or the themes, I'll just give everybody a moment to think about those.
And we have some questions for you as well here. So with what you've seen there from Paul, do you see how the role archetype approach could be a practical way to translate this foresighting insights into action? Please add any comments into the chat or the Q&A, and we can pick those up. Should we put the archetype slide back up? Just one moment.
Yeah, I can do that.
This one?
Yep. Probably the one that's got the, I think, the 3
different
down
ones
the side and then the expansion.
Yeah.
So the idea behind this really is that out of the 77 role profiles, it's really about trying to be able to say what's the starting point, and those archetypes that are listed in the middle are the kind of the minimum number of starting points we think are likely to be needed at this point.
We got any other questions coming into the Q&A, or any other questions on how the archetypes are formed, or also any responses to how useful you think that might be within your own situation to help understand the foresighting data differently? We'll just give you a moment there to put in any questions or any responses. Okay. Are we taking silence as everyone fully understands the archetype
so.
approach?
I think we will be able to share the slide pack afterwards as well.
We will. And also at the end of this, it's an opportunity, of course, as we go through this, to add any other questions as your understanding grows. I think the naming of other is not recognizing the full suite of skills. We've got a comment there.
Yes, we may want to think of a better title there. They tend to be, I mean, as you can see, sort of science roles or enterprise roles as well. The other thing I should say that we are likely to do in the future is looking across data sets from other catapults as well. And it's likely that as we do that, some more archetypes will emerge, and that might give us a chance to rename some of those as well.
Okay.
Shall we pick up at the next section, Dina?
Yep, no problem at all. I'm afraid I'll just jump back through these. So if you do have any comments as we go, please do pop them into the chat about this practical approach and any reasons why you think it might work or why not. And also, we've got another question here for you. How might this role archetype approach support quicker decisions around reskilling, recruitment, or investment? So would that simplify it? Would that help you support quicker decisions? Any feedback on that is helpful as well. But again, as Paul said, we will ask this again. You have the opportunity to give us feedback during this webinar or after this webinar. Are there any comments coming in there? Not quite yet. We can always pick those through as we go through.
I think we'll circle back to Dinah as
Exactly.
if everyone's seen the platform as well.
So, Paul, do you want to talk us through the project that we've got here?
Yeah, I'll give it a quick introduction. So, we're really looking at what they've come to term operationalizing the data. And what we mean by that is presenting the data and making it available in a way that is useful to employers and educators and employees. And that's about trying to understand how, for example, people can move between roles. In particular, we're conscious of the just transition and workers who may be moving from legacy energy over to renewables. We're hoping to help people understand how the different qualifications that are available or emerging can support transition, and in particular the future technologies. And we also want to be able to highlight to people what the expected gaps are, and say a key part of foresighting is being able to get to that leading footing on skills. So trying to let educators and training organisations begin that process as soon as possible of developing curriculum and content, so that learners are processed through that in time to meet the emerging technologies. And then a lot of this as well is about that process of sense making, of trying to take data that is quite broad, it's complex, it can be ambiguous at times, and trying to put it into a meaningful format for users. And as I mentioned just there, the work we've done so far, being offshore renewable catapult, has been focused on offshore wind sector, but we are really just trying to broaden that out and look across other sectors in the future as well. So again, just a question about role archetypes, and if you think those might be useful to help identify those transferable and cross-cutting requirements and how they might support workforce mobility. I'll give you a minute or two just to think about that. I can see a question as well from Mary Jo already.
Thank you for your feedback, Mary Jo. That's helpful to understand. The archetypes concept, and I think that contrast that you're talking about, agile and cross-cutting skills, might come into play as we go through this, because I think it might give you more understanding about those themes as we step through, I think.
Yeah, I'm conscious I've probably talked quite quickly as well, but I think from our perspective, it's an and. So we're trying to provide the archetypes as that sort of simplified foundation and use the cross-cutting themes that we've identified as well, so that together we think that the idea of the starting point with the archetype and the cross-cutting themes begin to equip and meet that future demand.
We've got a second question here. One of the main reasons we've got some feedback there from Danielle. Thank you, Danielle, about the role archetype approach. So the pairing back to the core roles helps us understand the foundational skills. So it's about sort of modular approach, really, isn't it? It's understanding the foundational need and then the extra need on top of that, and how we can use that data in that way to help people operationalize and get to grips with that data. So we've got another question here about how using this might help you with real-time decision making. Do you think that would be helpful for you?
I think one of the things that's interesting, just back to that question now as well, there's mention of agility. One of the hopes actually is that the archetypes help agility for the skills and training sector to develop content, because we move from a point where we're saying, yeah, we think you should create a course on software engineering for autonomous subsea platforms, to a footing that says, actually, if you start with your existing software engineering qualification, you can add on this much smaller and more manageable bunch of capabilities. And we think that gets to a ready place. So part of the thinking behind that is to make it more agile and faster for the development of content. Hopefully here we're trying to put a platform in place that will help do that. And you'll see some of that a little bit later as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Paul.
Jump on.
Yeah.
So we've really been looking at this idea of skills as a golden thread, cutting right through that skills value chain that I mentioned at the beginning. And the work that SkillsMiner have done in the past and are bringing to this project as well is really about being able to surface and make really visible that golden thread, and looking at different points and different perspectives, how skills form an important part of that future technology deployment. Is there anything else you want to say about the golden thread there, Dina or Kirsty?
Thanks, Paul. And thank you for the overview as well. I really like the how we've built this up, thinking about the archetypes and then the skills and capabilities that sit underneath that. And so I think that as we move into the prototype, hopefully you'll start to see how we've used this as the building blocks to creating that value and allowing people to shape what that future looks like. and then also looking at the kind of educational connections. How do we close that skills gap and things like this? So it's a lot of data, a lot of moving parts, but it's a bit like building Lego blocks. That's the way I like to think about it. You know, you're ultimately creating that future foresight view using the data. And so the technology around this has helped us to look at the commonality, the similarities and differences between all of that. And so it helps it to make it a bit more real, doesn't it?
Certainly does. So I think I've given a quick gallop through the background to how we've collected a lot of data, how we've started to try and make sense of that data,
Yep.
the capabilities and the profiles through concepts of role archetypes and the cross-cutting themes. Hopefully that brings you sort of up to speed as to where we are just now. And I think this is a good point probably to hand over to SkillsMiner and let them introduce the work that we're doing next.
Thanks, Paul. That's great. So we've taken all this interesting data and this great work that's happened with the workforce foresighting, this future look. And what we're going to touch on in the second part of this webinar are the use cases and the pilot prototype demonstrations to show you how we could operationalize that data. So I'll hand over to Kirsty here, and she's just going to tell you a little bit more about SkillsMiner, and then we'll step into the use cases and the way that we can approach this data differently.
Thank you, Dinah, and thank you, Paul. It's an awful lot of information to take in, and so you've done it in a really sort of succinct way. It's a lot to cover in a short period of time. So like what Paul said, you know, we started off looking at all of this data. It's a big giant pool of data, and by applying our workforce intelligence platform and our thinking and our previous experiences of mapping and mining skills and capabilities and looking at how do they fit into the labour market and how do we close skills gaps, we started to unpick the data and look and find where the hidden and transversal skills are so we could unlock more agility through the data. So rather than thinking about things as being siloed as they kind of more traditionally are in the labour market at this moment in time, using our technology and using Paul and Danielle's research and intelligence that they've built up over those different cycles, we started to really map that. And we're going to walk you through what's happened as a result of the data and as a result of looking at how that all comes together in one central place. And we've taken a very systems-based approach to operationalisation the actual foresight data itself. And so, then I don't know if you want to jump into this slide a little bit more.
Yep, thanks, Kirsty. So what we're seeing here is the system approach to the workforce foresighting data. Workforce foresighting data is system-led itself because it's looking at all of the industry, the innovations, the technologies that are coming down the line that are going to impact us in terms of the industrial strategy. So for UK growth, our industrial strategy has recognised sets of priorities and innovation needs and technology needs across the UK. Those can be based in different regions on different technology routes, which is why the catapults are so important in this picture. But basically, that need has driven the workforce capabilities that Paul has talked us through this morning. And in order to operationalize that approach, we're taking those workforce capabilities. We're also looking at skills. We're also looking at qualifications, and we're also looking at job roles to build up this complete picture of what's happening in the space around need and demand and supply. And what this project has done is taken each of those elements, applied some translation and curation to the data that's available in those areas, built that into a common language, and also with the SkillsMiner prototype platform that we've developed with this project, we're looking at driving new value across that system through integration and visibility. So that's going to give future fit insights to each of these groups that we see across the bottom, right across the system, from policy, industry groups like industry representative bodies, for instance, Renewable UK. We have things, we have a need for education to understand. That's right across the education space, from HE, FE, independent learning providers, and also apprenticeships, also L&D internally into organisations. And we also have employers who have to understand this workforce foresighting data and the future fit that that's going to give them, as well as the impact that it has on individuals, employees, and communities. So each of those needs is recognised in this project about how operationalising that future look will give them benefits in different ways. For policy, they can see the future fit need aligned to those industrial strategy priorities. They can see what the technology is coming down the line. They can understand more about what that's actually going to mean in practice to people. For those industry groups that we've talked to, it's about addressing the future workforce needs collectively across industry skill sectors, in effect, and understanding where to best plan and where to best invest to make the most of those technologies that are going to drive that industrial strategy and the innovation need. For educators, they're going to be able to understand and see an articulated need in a better way, because using the workforce foresighting data will allow them to see the future fit look. So you're not just trying to fix here and now and the problem we have right now today, but you're also using that workforce foresighting data to inform you on the best way to look at developing future fit curriculum. How could we do this so it's got more longevity and more application across a different range of themes, possibly across different sectors, so we're getting best value from the education offer. And for employers, it's again understanding that future fit workforce. Am I looking to hire in people in my workforce plan at entry level? Am I looking to invest in my organisation? How am I best going to invest? And instead of just fixing right now, if I invest differently, will that give me a future fit workforce that's going to be able to adapt these new technologies and these new innovations that we've got on the horizon? And for employees and communities, that matters as well, because clearly we come back to the regional and local implications of the industrial strategy and the growth that's needed in regions across sectors, and understanding that future need in an applicable way is going to help our employees inside organisations, but also our communities recognise areas for growth, areas for investment. So where we have things like local skills improvement plan, we can use that data more intelligently to help inform how that might look in that region. So if that's prompting any questions, do please pop those into the chat as well. But we'll just step through some of the specific use cases and some of the problems that we've worked through when we've been developing this prototype. Should I hand back to you, Kirsty, for those?
Yeah, no problem at all. I was just going to quickly jump in there and summarise really a little bit more about what Dinah was saying there. It's this ecosystem that we want to be able to create. It's a way for people to communicate supply and demand. What do we need from our education sector? You know, where are the skills gaps? What things do we need to build that make it really current and relevant to what employers need? And it's a way for employers to be able to communicate, this is what I'm working towards and this is what I need for my staff and people. And for that, employees and communities, it's how we fit. Where do our skills, where are they leading us to? What about our career pathways? So we didn't want to do this in a siloed way anymore. We really want to be able to bring this together into one collective data set, and hopefully that's what we'll walk you through in the next stage. So happy to jump into the next slides, Dinah. So like what we've summarised, we've looked at the different users, the different voices, the different stories of each one of these different groups of people that we believe that the system should help and support. So one of the first ones was looking at policy leaders and industry leaders. And like what Dinah said, you know, it's where do I invest? You know, what skills matter most to me in my region? What is the capability in my region? And if we work towards and aspire towards encouraging employment and education in our regions, what should we be investing in? You know, what takes us there in the fastest and most cost-effective way? And how do we support that ecosystem to get there? So we needed the data to help them better inform what their skills strategies would look like. You know, so it doesn't just match for just the whole thing as a blanket for the UK, but that they could really look at what productivity meant to them in a region. And then also thinking about the funding, you know, it can't continue to be just who shouts the loudest, or, you know, it should be data-driven decisions that we're making at a regional level. So how could this data better inform the work that they need to do and support them to do that in a timely way? So let them see where that attention needs to go first and foremost. That was another thing that we thought was very critical from speaking to policymakers. And sometimes it's what we discovered as well, it's hard for them to see what industry really needs, not just even in the here and now, but in the future as well. So providing that connected story, you know, how do we go from here to where we need to be going in the future? So the stepping stones to take us there. So the data had to inform that part of their work and their journey. And right now, I think what we also found from speaking to policymakers is that sometimes it feels that there's a lack of granularity in the data that is available to help support them make sort of timely decisions and things. So they want to be able to see where those transversal themes are. They want to know that if I invest in this, is that the one to many? You know, is that going to help us tackle more things at a regional level rather than just taking a siloed approach to maybe solving one part of the jigsaw puzzle over here, but then it totally it doesn't allow us to be able to tackle other problems at another regional level in different sectors as well. So looking at those transversal skills and really helping them to kind of forecast and plan. So we'll have a little look at that. Next slide, Dinah.
What we're going to do is we're just going to talk through the different use cases, and then we'll talk you through because there's a lot of overlap within the prototype. So rather than trying to split it out, what we'll do is we will run through these and then we'll show you how that journey ties together in the prototype. So the next one that we've got is the employer user journey.
Yeah, so for employers, and this is a common theme right across the board, from some of the largest organisations in the UK that we speak to, down to emerging SMEs with fantastic innovation and really trying to enter into the marketplace. You know, we found that they were really struggling to say, well, how do I know what it is that I've got in my organisation today, let alone even start planning for what tomorrow looks like? And there's no HRS platform out there that really allows me to look at this data in a dynamic way. And how do I try and triangulate that with my employees as well? So then I can really start to think, do I need to employ more people? Or is it that I'm going to upskill my people? Can that be done in a more cost-effective way? Will that help us become more competitive as an organisation if we start to adopt and understand how these skills could influence even our own growth as an organisation as well? So really wanted this data to feel real and actionable and timely, and that it would triangulate inside their business. It shouldn't just be a website that shows them, if you do this and you do that, then this equals that. We wanted them to be able to take that data, apply it to their own needs, and then think about how does that better inform their own strategic growth plan and things. So that data really had to be grounded not only in this amazing research that Paul and Daniel has done, but actually what's going on inside organisations today. How do we get them to create that common language for the skills that they have and the skills that they need? So that here and now. And then also thinking about the transversal skills that are inside their organisation as well. I think from a lot of the conversations that we've had with employers throughout the project and beyond that, is it's sometimes really difficult to think about where capability lies across the business and not just in one department. So is there a better way for me to use skills and capability in my business? And can this data help me unlock that potential that we have? Next slide, Dinah. And this takes me to the next step. As a former teacher, I've got a big part of my heart lies in the education and upskilling, not only inside organisations, but how do we connect up the dots of what's actually happening in our education sector right now? Where do we better invest our time, and what things are missing from the education sector right now that will help us expedite the growth that employers are looking to implement inside their own organisations? So is it a whole, for example, new apprenticeship we need to make? Or is it just a subset of modules at the end of this that allows us to unlock what that future career pathway may look like? And then how do we use these themes? How do we use the transferable skills that sit inside that to also give us a one-to-many approach? So, for example, if I take this learning content, will this help not just, for example, offshore energy? Can it help automation or digital skills in other parts of my region as well? So it's about making content that's very highly relevant, super timely, cost effective, and it lets education or educators be able to see what that looks like in real time as well. So it removes the guesswork. We're using data to best inform what that content looks like. And it gives us a common language to communicate that supply and demand. What is it that I actually really need inside my organisation or at a regional level? Thanks, Dinah. Next slide. I'm whizzing through these. Hopefully this resonates with everybody that's on the call anyway. So, and then really thinking about where does this actually hit the ground running? You know, I'm an employee, I'm inside an organisation. What's the next step for me on my career ladder? Or I'm a school leaver and I'm thinking about entering the labour market, or thinking about what I could go and study at college or university. Or do I get into an apprenticeship? Where does that lead me to next? You know, where are my skills going to be in demand? And what we found, obviously, with all of the research and a lot of the engagement that we've had with businesses over more than 10 years now, is that more often than not, employees do not know what their potential is inside the organisation. If they've got fantastic line managers, that's great. They'll be able to communicate what that next step may be. But actually, what if you don't? And what if that's not been, what are you not being made aware of? You know, so where it might not be, for example, in the swim lane that you're in right now, it might be somewhere else across the business. It might be in a task. It might be in a project, for example. So by using this data dynamically, we can really start to unlock productivity inside those businesses. But it was ultimately about being able to use the data so employees could think about, well, what's my next step? Where is my potential lie? What can I learn? You know, what things do I pull off the L&D system? Or, you know, do I talk to my line manager, for example, about this other opportunity that's emerging in the business right now? Because I can already see I've got 60% of the capability to be able to do that. So this was really about being able to retain people, to excite them about their career pathway and make them see how that learning, that continuous learning, is part of their own evolution, not just inside organisations, but we hope across the sectors as well. So whistle stop tour through all the different voices and actors and coming together in that ecosystem effect. And I think as we move forward, I think beyond this slide, I don't know if we're gonna stop for a little quick break before we start to jump into the actual demo.
Yeah, we've just done nearly an hour. Rather than jumping into the demo with everybody wriggling around, I think we're going to offer everybody a quick 2-minute comfort break to be back here to go back through the demo. So if that's okay with everybody, we'll just pause here for a moment and allow you a quick 2 minutes, and then we'll jump back in to show you through the product. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks everybody.
Right, thank you everybody, and thanks for staying with us to go through the rest of this webinar. So we actually have Dan going to talk to us now and explain the prototype. So what I'm going to do, just bear with me for a second. We're just going to jump back to a slide earlier in the deck to help people understand the context, Dan, aren't we? So one moment, I'll just jump us back through to that. Right, Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Diana, and thanks, Paul and Kirsty as well for the talks earlier. That was really good in terms of making it concise and understandable. But I'm conscious, of course, that is a lot to take in, and obviously our objective throughout this process was to take all of the incredible data really that's been created throughout this workforce foresighting process, and yes, make it operational, but also make it simpler, and to maybe replay a couple of the words that we've heard today, allow organizations, whether that's policy, employers, education, or even individual employees or people looking for work, to make that data a bit more agile so that they can act on that in different purposes. So the reason I just wanted to call back to this slide a little bit was because this is what we've tried to do. Well, this is one example of something that I'm going to show you in the prototype. You've got this concept here of taking an archetype and adding some of the emergent theme stuff to create like a new kind of role. Now, the challenge you've sometimes got is you've got a lot of change going on there. You can see with the capabilities that you've got listed in the bottom half of that slide, there's a lot. So we've taken it to be, you can like kind of iterate that approach. So you're not having to do everything all in one go. So you can take an archetype and to take Mary Jo's comment earlier, that you sometimes need those to be a lot more agile. So it could be a mechanical engineer, or it could be something that relates to your specific organization, or it could be any number of different things. So if you can store that image in your head just for a second, and I'll now take you to the prototype, and hopefully this will then make some sense. Can you see my screen there, everybody?
Yes, we can, Dan.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So this is the equivalent of that screen that we just looked at there, where we've got that concept of taking something in the current and the here and now and adding to it. So this can apply to whether it could be like at a policy level, trying to understand the archetypes, those pared back archetypes, or the expanded archetypes, a bit like we saw earlier, or it could be for an individual employer that is looking to a role in their organization. They're looking to iterate that along a little bit. So what we've done as part of this project is we've mapped lots of different roles. So for example, we've got the future roles that Paul was describing as part of the workforce foresighting. We've looked at from the offshore wind industry council roles, the scarce and critical roles that they've done, the archetypes I've just described, some roles that SkillsMiner have brought to the table that are kind of related to this particular sector. And from like maybe more of like an individual employer section, we've looked at some of the roles that exist within the ORE Catapult and kind of mapped those. But for the purposes of this exercise, what we'll do is we'll look at like a kind of current archetype, and we'll pick a RAS pilot. So you can see here, just by selecting the RAS pilot as part of workforce foresight, and we've kind of extracted all of the capability requirements and the skills requirements for that particular role. But what we're trying to do, obviously, here is think more about how we iterate and improve on that particular role. So looking at the kind of emerging things, or transversal things, as we sometimes call them, you can see here we've got the three areas that Paul described earlier, and then we've broken them down into the cycles that have occurred during the workforce foresighting. So if we look, for example, at the robotics and autonomous systems, you can see here these are the potential capabilities that you would add to the current view of what a RAS pilot does to push it further into the future. So we've got a list here of 21 potential capabilities that you might choose to add to improve that role and use these new emerging technologies. So you can see here that we've got varying different capabilities. As the user of the platform, you can decide whether you want that to be, you know, like at what proficiency levels, or whether you want to keep it or remove it or add additional ones. And ultimately, at the end of that process, what that then enables you to do is to be able to, going back to Kirsty's description earlier, you can then bring that role into the ecosystem. So again, I might labour this point a little bit, but if this was at a strategic level, that might be an expanded view of what an archetype is. If it was for an individual employer, it might be a role within their organisation that ultimately you can then, you know, visualise and measure the gaps against more particularly. So if we put this being about, we'll call this RAS Pilot AI V2. And you can see here, we've just used a bit of AI to describe what that profile difference is compared to how it's different to where it was before, the kind of key responsibilities and relevant training as well that's suitable. Now, what we can now do is we can kind of bring that into the ecosystem. So by clicking that button, we've now created that role as a new role that exists within the platform. So if you can just pair that back again to what we were talking about earlier, what we're trying to do there is obviously think about that, putting it into practice slide, where you're taking that individual role, whether that's an archetype, a future role, a role that exists within your organization, and bringing it into the future a little bit more, or using the technology of tomorrow. So that's kind of great. That's how that works for that agility for the role. Now what I'd like us to look at is, and please do, by the way, if there's any questions on this as we're going through it, please do pop those in the Q&A. What we'll look at now is how this works from more of like an educational or kind of learning and development perspective. So what we've now got is the two versions of a RAS pilot. So we've got that original RAS pilot archetype that we talked about before, and what we've done through the workforce foresighting project is kind of map a sample of qualifications and learning provision that would be deemed suitable to address the needs of a particular role. So you can see here, just to explain this in a little bit more detail, again, I know this is sometimes quite a lot to take in when you see a big matrix like this, so just to explain this in a bit more detail, you can see the individual capability requirements of a RAS pilot that are listed across the top there, that detailed in more detail here with the legend, the proficiency requirement for that particular role, and using some Skills England data, we've estimated the guided learning hours for each of those capabilities. And then what you can see in the rows below are the qualifications that are suitable for this particular role. Now, what you can see here is we've got coverage of 57% for this current role. So we're missing 6 capabilities, which are highlighted by this role at the bottom there. But taking it back to the point that Paul made earlier, so if we're looking at this for maybe like a new role and we're trying to inform education into terms of where it is that they need to go to develop processes or adapt apprenticeship standards to make this suitable, what you can then view through this lens, now that we're looking at the newer version of this RAS pilot, is all of these new capabilities that are required. And you can see now, obviously, we've got a much larger gap. There's a much bigger gap that we've got between the two now, whereas it was only 6 missing before, we're now missing 22. Now that's partially because I added a lot of new capabilities, but obviously the point there being is that as you add things, you begin to see that gap widen, which you can then use to create that kind of demand signal back to the education sector to kind of say, if you're an employer or if you're at a strategy level, saying that these are the roles that are beginning to emerge in practice now, not just in theory, not something that's like 5 years down the line, but this is something that's happening in the here and now. You can see where those gaps apply. So if you can use your imagination a little bit and like kind of fast forward those conversations, so you've either worked internally with your L&D departments or you've gone out to an external educator, what we could then do, of course, is then create that provision. We kind of know the capabilities that it's required. Therefore, we know roughly how long the guided learning hour would take to learn all of that particular provision. Just like we did before, we can export that to SkillsMiner, and then that becomes part of that ecosystem approach that we talked about earlier. So you can see qualifications emerge as they appear in response to the demand of employers, and vice versa. Employers can see the qualifications that suit their needs for the roles that exist in their organization, or similarly at a policy level, if it's an archetype that's like adapted over time, that can kind of see a more national or regional level, if you like, the kind of qualifications that become available to meet that demand. So that's our kind of core hope for this, I suppose, is that as a usable, practical system, that it's that visibility of kind of roles and how they evolve, and then also the education like sector's response to those particular demand signals that we're seeing across the labour market. I appreciate in particular that's quite a lot to take on board, because you're dealing with the concept of both qualifications and roles evolving across the entire system. But hopefully that makes sense. Please feel free to post any questions in the Q&A section. I was just going to very briefly touch on before we move on to anything else, because Dan obviously went through those and Kirsty went through those user types in the previous section. So we've looked at what that means, obviously, at a policy, employer, an educational level, where that education is like a college or internally inside an organization. And there was that fourth section, obviously, about what that would mean for an individual. So I'm just going to show you what this would look like now for an individual, using the example that we've just said. So if we look for imagine we've got an employee who works in the sector now, who's a RAS pilot in the current state, in the here and now. What they're then able to look at is what that would look like in the future. So if we just have a search here for the new role that we created there. So what this then enables an individual to see is then what capabilities they've got in common. So in this particular example, they've got all of their capabilities in common because they have no surplus, because all we've really input there for this particular simplified version is that they're a RAS pilot, but it also, and probably most crucially, identifies the gaps for them to be able to identify where they need to fill those gaps. So these are the missing capabilities that we saw earlier as well. And they can then visualize that in terms of what that looks like in terms of the missing skills and the different qualifications that they can use to address those kind of skills gaps as well. So what we're trying to do with all of this, of course, is make it usable across the entire network of different user groups that we saw earlier. So it isn't just like something that sits at a top level, it kind of filters all the way down to the bottom as well. Additionally, just for individuals, I suppose, when they've got those missing capabilities, we would like the tool to be able to, obviously it's prototype stage, but going forward, allow people to set goals for the missing capabilities they've not got, so they can like create development plans as well. And we kind of think this is important as well, because great as it is if you've got that policy level approach of like kind of top down and, you know, helping people to drive them towards the new careers, we also believe there's a part to play here in kind of self-efficacy, that individual employees or individual people can also use the system as well. So it isn't just always about, oh, well, you know, we've used a really simple example here of somebody moving into an upskilled version of the current role, but an individual might not want to do that. They might want to move horizontally, they might want to move upwards, they might want to move into a different section altogether. So you can only really do that if you put that into the hands of individual people, so that they can see how they can forge their own career paths. Okay, unless there's any questions or anything you'd like me to drill into any deeper, I'll pause there.
Thanks, Dan. Please do put any questions in the chat. Has anybody got any questions about the approach, or would you like to add anything, Paul?
I'll just say thank you to Dan and skillsminer team. There's a lot of capability in that tool. We've just given you a quick overview today. So yeah, thank you to Dan and team for all the hard work that's gone into the platform.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if now's the right time. I'll give a quick summation at the end as well. Dina,
Yeah, we've got a few questions to ask back to the group at the moment. So, having seen the prototype, do you think that this helps you to bridge the gap between workforce insight and real world action? And if you could please explain if you think it does help, why, or if it doesn't help you, why not? That would be helpful for us. As Danielle's added into the chat there, it's helpful to use this approach, we think, where regions where there are changes in sectors. So, for instance, where we have a sector that's possibly employing less people or declining in innovation technology in an area where there's another area that's growth. And I know that this is, for instance, fits into the industrial strategy where we've got some areas in decline and other areas of growth. We want to make sure we can see how we transfer people into those areas. Are there any other comments on the prototype approach? Okay, you will have the opportunity, of course, to comment after this webinar if you wish to, or if you want to speak to us about a further deep dive, you can do that as well. What stands out as most useful for you or is missing in making it actionable for your organisation? We have people from different organizations, I think, on this call in terms of people who are in education, employment, policy, and different areas. So this question is general in terms of what's useful or missing in making it actionable for you and your specific needs, because we've tried to use that ecosystem approach. So we'd appreciate any feedback if you can share that. Thanks for your feedback there, Mary Jo, about this being large L&D departments. I think the education requirements part that Dan demonstrated is applicable. We've been talking to apprenticeship providers, learning providers, FE colleges and HE as well.
Yep. And sometimes as well, what I find, especially for SMEs, is when they maybe don't have an HR department or they don't know where to begin with what L&D may be the most appropriate. And especially even being a smaller organisation ourselves, you know, it's you want to be able to spend your money really wisely. So you want to know, okay, if I'm going to put my people on a training course, what's the most effective? What's going to get us the most longevity out of it? So I think we're exploring different ways that smaller organisations can use this, maybe with sector leads or, for example, those larger regional bodies like ORE, for example, you know, when people come along and ask for support, well, where should I begin with this, you know? So hopefully they can make use of the tool and support maybe some smaller organisations that don't have fully blown L&D departments.
Thank you. We've got a couple of other comments in here as well. Sarah is saying it helps to inform staff development as well as designing the curriculum. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to look at it in terms of a system. So it's not got that siloed approach, so it's joining it together. And how we could use this information to support dual professional updating. That's an interesting use case as well, Sarah. So if you did want to share more on that, we could perhaps look at how we think about that professionalism. Brett, how much does the system do in terms of defining future skills, capability requirements, and how does it do this? And how does it do this with current workforce as is? So the future skills and capability requirements, the data is used from the workforce foresighting cycles. So that's very much the focus of this project, is to operationalize that data and use that, because that's industry-led, technology-led, innovation-led, and it's the role of our catapults and our industrial strategy to focus on what's coming and then translating that into an operational manner for us to deal with. And the current workforce, the skills miner approach that we've used to date is what gives us that foundational approach, Brett, to look at the current workforce, because looking at the future need becomes useful when we compare it to the current need, because you have something to move from A to B. If we're just looking at B, it's quite hard to contextualize that. Whereas if we've got the current workforce need, we can drive that information from workforce insights that we have today.
Yep. And also kind of operationally, Brett, sometimes the best way to think about this, so that might be the type exam question that Dinah's talking about in terms of the actual, what does it do? How do we do that? So for example, we'll engage with employees on a one-to-one basis. We can engage with via API into an HRS system. So we're extracting out the top layer of those skills, and then we derive meaning from that. So we can understand from the current job title to where that maps to, like as is state to that future state. So we can look at it that way. And we also can do that as well with people that have even left just secondary education, moving into further education as well. So there's a full-blown little chatbot that sits and engages with people to get that information in. And or inside an organisation, for example, if they do not want to engage with their workforce, we can look at, okay, what are the existing roles that you have in your organisation right now? Create that DNA of what's actually inside the organisation at this moment in time, and then start to look at what would happen if we start to move the workforce towards this future state. So that allows us to do it with employees and or with people from the outside world transversing into the sector, and or completely as a almost like a desktop type exercise. That's the how part of how do we get this all to come together, and the platform allows those different actors all to access it through their own portal system. Hope that helps that little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Danielle's replied there as well about the smaller organisations, and it's important as SMEs, you can sometimes feel out of the loop of this, and it's important that using this data in this way, however that is presented to people, to allows them to actually access that approach rather than they don't have the big R&D team, the big L&D team. How can we make that operational for them, and they can see how education programs might help their workforce if they align to that new innovation or new technologies, and bringing that into their organization. So I have got a couple of other questions coming through here if anybody does want to contribute to these.
This is great.
Does it make it easier to translate complex skills data into practical actions like training, hiring, or investment? So what you've seen today, do you think that makes it easier to translate those complex skills data insights into practical actions? Danielle's put a further comment in here about helping young people entering the workforce to ensure that they receive education that's future-proofed. So this is actually really important, because by using that workforce foresighting data, you can plan for that future-proof look, as opposed to fixing just right now, the here and now. And especially if we're looking at the numbers that we've got to do to change different industrial sectors, as Paul shared at the beginning of this, those numbers are huge. And so bringing people in from other industry sectors or new people to the workforce, they need to be learning the best things that give them transferability and best future fit to move into those key sectors and see what roles are available for them as well.
It's kind of like a big key part of what our platform did in the very beginnings when we set off, was always to show people about what was the art of the potential. With my existing skills or with skills that I'm learning in education right now, what opportunities does that open me up to, whether it's inside an organisation or whether it's in the local labour market. So that's a big part of what SkillsMiner does, and it's always about increasing that social mobility across a region.
We'll wait for any more comments to come in, but also I'd like to understand if access to a platform like this, would it change how you understand and apply future skills insights? So using something like this would give you more insight and help your understanding. Have we got any comments on that question or any feedback on that? Great. Thank you very much, Gary. It would provide clarity on gaps in the evidence for design, development and delivery. I'm pleased to read that. Thank you. That is what we've tried to do. But it would be great to see if anybody else had thoughts on how this might help them understand and apply those future skills insights, because it's about operationalizing that data and making it super useful for everybody across that system. I've got a couple of other questions here. Do you think this would increase your confidence that training provision is aligned with the real industry needs? I know Paul spoke earlier in this session, and Kirsty did, about the difficulty everybody has in explaining what their needs are. And that impact is felt both by the industry player and by the education provider, because if we can't articulate it, it makes it quite hard to design educational curriculum content that meets the need, because industry aren't able to articulate that either. So being able to see that split by these archetypes and themes, would it increase your confidence that the training provision is aligned to the real industry need?
Yeah, Sarah's just said it provides clarity on the gaps and the evidence for design and development delivery. There is no investment from senior leaders to take action about an evidence base, so thank you. I think it's using data to best steer what decisions we make, and what's really amazing about the platform and what we've done with the data is the more that we see people taking the building blocks and using them, then we know where the sector is growing to, because employers are engaging with it and utilising it and trying to do things with the building blocks. And that allows us to then see, okay, is the gap fulfilled? Or is there new gaps emerging? So we can dynamically kind of track that as well. So there's learning inside this that verifies its applicability, I suppose. And right now, I don't think that I've come across anything that really does that, especially in a kind of future, like plotting towards that future pathway. So that's the hope.
Exactly. And leading on from that.
Oh, I lost you, Dinah. Don't know if we've just lost Dinah there or whether it's me that the sound's gone.
No, I think we've got
another question there. Do we think it could help being reactive? Do you think this approach would?
Oh, I think there's a little bit of a lag, Dinah.
Can you hear me?
You're back. You're back now.
Am I back? Am I back?
Yes.
Sorry, I had a couple of other. Great. I had another couple of questions here about, does this help you shift perhaps from a more proactive, from a lagging approach to a more proactive leading approach to your future skills? And how might this influence your workforce planning, your education provision or policy decisions over time? I know we've got people on the call from different sectors, so it would be interesting to hear from your perspective. Do you think it would give you that ability to become more proactive, or do you think it would influence you? And if so, how? Great. Thank you for that. So there are going to obviously be some barriers and challenges for how we might move on with this approach. And so if you were able to share any barriers that might prevent adoption or any additional support that people might need, please do share that in the chat. So what would you think might be needed to help this scale in your organisation or outside your organisation? And also point us to any barriers that might prove difficult for this, that that you might be thinking of when you look at this prototype that we shared with you today? Okay, we've got a question in here from Brent that's saying offshore only makes up a small part of the business I work for with regards to full-time equivalent requirements. So are we looking to expand into transmission and or distribution? So our approach is that with this prototype, we can gain some traction and prove that it could work with other sectors, and we could use the data that's been gathered across other catapults and other workforce foresighting cycles to expand into different industries and show that value of some of those transversal skills and skill sets and themes. Paul, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, two things. Thanks, Dinah. Yes, so the latest cycle we've done, which starts to look at hybrid energy, touches quite a lot on grid connectivity. So there's some skills coming through there via offshore wind about grid, but then the sort of subsequent part of this work, once we've moved beyond the pilot, hopefully, we have data from the other catapults across the UK as well, and that includes the Energy Systems Catapult, who look much more into that topic of grid and distribution also. So we will incorporate that data in the future, hopefully as well. Thanks, Dinah.
Great, thanks, Paul. And just a final question for everybody. What would success look like if this workforce foresighting genuinely influenced workforce, education, or policy decisions in your organisation? Can you share how could you see it working for you, and what would be the impact for you in your organisation? If you're able to share that, that's really helpful for us in terms of taking this work forward. I know Danielle's also put in the chat there that it's about ensuring the UK remains globally competitive by having the right skills, right place, right time, and that the emerging technology, which we're so great at developing in the UK, has to be key in meeting our targets so that we actually are equipped to land that new technology with the right people in the right place. So that's what success would look like for us in terms of supporting those net zero targets. If anyone's got anything else that they wish to add, please do so. Thank you. So next steps from here, if you do have any further questions, we shared our contact details at the beginning of the webinar. If you have any more to share, you can provide further feedback on this link. I know sometimes people can feel difficult about sharing things on a webinar. That QR code will take you to some of the questions that we've shared today, and you can share those in your own time if you want to. Keep informed and follow the ORE Catapult on LinkedIn and see more about this project. You've also got connections there to Paul and to ourselves if you want to keep up to date with any of the other activities that are happening in this pilot and project. So other than that, I think that we've got some great feedback here to add to. Thanks, Leo. This is what the success looks like, being able to link regional development plans to future skills demand and therefore work with local stakeholders to support the right skills interventions. Great. Yes, that is great to see that in terms of the success factors. Thank you. And Brent sharing that it would increase certainty around meeting future skills requirements and provide pathways for employees, helping reduce attrition. Paul's going to just do a quick recap here with us now. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Over to you, Paul.
All right. Thank you, Dinah. Yeah, just like to say that I know we've taken you through a lot of information today. I really appreciate, first of all, you joining the call, and thank you also for all of your questions and feedback. And thank you again to Kirsty, Dinah, and Dan. It is an ongoing process, this work. We're in a pilot stage at the moment. And I know Danielle would like me to say that we really welcome your interest in this work and your engagement moving forwards as well. I think a lot of this is about our recognition that it's hard for stakeholders to sort of articulate future skills needs. But really, we're coming at this with the recognition that it's vital to move from that lagging to leading perspective on skills. Otherwise, it's still going to be lagging in 5 or 10 years' time. So that's something we're really hopeful to move the needle and shift the dial on. And our hope is that the role archetypes plus the cross-cutting themes, and then supported by the work that SkillsMiner have brought to it and the platform, that really we've shown there's an easier way to look at this problem. So, our drive behind that is that we want the UK to remain a competitive global player in renewables and in other sectors. We need to hit net zero targets, and to do that, we've got to enable this productive future workforce. So, this is just a way of moving the dial on that, and hopefully creating a solution to a problem that historically has held the UK back, in terms of developing that leading and future skills perspective. So that then supports mobility in this sector and beyond as well. So hopefully we have found a bit of a golden thread through some of these difficult problems. I hope that you've taken something away from the information that we've given you today. I hope it's been of interest. Again, thank you for your questions and participation, and we'll hopefully hear from you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.